1340 96.5 KVGC. 742 is promised. In the studio with us today is Supervisor Jack Garamendi from Calaveras County. Supervisor, good morning.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for coming across the river, the long ways to be with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm fortunate enough to live right on the other side of the river. Such a short run over to Jackson.
There we
it's
go.
Always fun to visit Amador.
Well, let's just back this up. So we've been trying to get a hold of Jack for a while to come on and just talk about Calaveras County, politics and so forth. We have Richard Forrester and Pat Crew do it, on this side. We've had Paul Stein in the past when Paul was in office, tell us about Calaveras doings. And now, so we thought we'd reach out to Jack, and so happens the day we do that is a day that actually you kind of got turned back by your other members of the Board of Supervisors with, pretty much everyone knows about the ad hoc committee that was formed with you and Supervisor Mills. And so, long story short, Jack is here today, but in the meantime, the planning department has also released a draft ordinance that will deal with cannabis. So, Jack, let's just welcome you first.
Thank you very much.
Let me take a deep breath after all of that. And, welcome to politics in Calaveras County. So,
well, thank you. There's never a boring day in politics in Calaveras County. We might be small, but we're awfully exciting.
So, Jack, I guess, before we even get to what happened last Tuesday, what happened this past Friday, and I guess there's no real need to point fingers on this because other people are not here to defend themselves. But for those of us here in Amador County, looking across the river in Calaveras County, we think to ourselves, how did this happen? How was this allowed? How were the marijuana farms allowed to pop up in the first place to where this brings us all today? Did law enforcement just turn their heads? Did the supervisors not pay attention? What was going on?
Well, that's a good question. I think if you want to figure out where you're going, it's always good to remember how you got there. And, this is a problem that's been a long time in the making. There's always been cannabis being grown in Calaveras County. I don't think that's any secret to anybody. Right. It's been growing up in the hills and pretty much hidden for views for, in some cases, generations of growers up there. We really have to look back at the history of how we got here, and we have to look at Proposition 215, which went through in 1995, I believe it was, which was the medical use of marijuana law. That had a lot of implications throughout the state, and a lot of these grows began to grow under that co-op model with patients putting forward their prescription. And then we moved into MRSA in the spring of 2015, and the state government began trying to craft laws around that. And in the county of Calaveras said, yeah, you know what, maybe this is something we don't want to take on right now. It's not a big issue for us. It's always happened up there. We sort of have turned a blind eye. It doesn't have a huge impact on our day-to-day. And then we had the fire. And that was really a turning point. So we're in a lot of counties like Amador and Tuolumne, we're working on putting together what their regulations are. A big chunk of our county burnt to the ground. And most of that fire happened in District 2, where I represent. So we lost almost 20% of the homeowners were impacted in our district. And so we had this fire. At the same time that we're reeling from it in October, the state signs the law that puts into effect MRSA. And we were staggering. We were trying to figure out which side was up. We were trying to deal with health and well-being of our citizens. We had people who were burnt out. A lot of people were really suffering and frankly, continue to suffer. And at that same time, numerous internet articles and other articles came out saying Calaveras is the best place in the country to grow cannabis because of our climate. So we have a huge fire. Our county government is reeling. People have lost their property. It's a moonscape out there, and people are coming in and buying up this property, and a lot of people are selling this property, and it all happened to us. Counties like Amador and Tuolumne, by the end of 2015, had put in place regulations banning it. We did nothing, so we had nothing on the books. We had nothing saying you could or nothing saying you couldn't, and this continued really till May of 2016. And so during that time, we had what we call in Calaveras the green rush. Literally thousands of people moved into our communities and started growing cannabis. The Board of Supervisors recognized that we had this crisis, and they put in place an urgency ordinance. And the urgency ordinance is by its nature a ordinance that's put together in a case of an emergency to deal with a clear and imminent threat, a clear and present threat, I should say. It put in place a moratorium. It said there'll be no more cannabis farms after this date. It put in place a process for registration. And then, we began to try to enforce it. By June, where we thought we were going to have roughly 350 to 500 registered grows, we had well over 700. And those are just the people that decided to put down $5,000 and say they go get the Water Conservation Board permits. All these things were supposed to come together, and the county got overwhelmed. We didn't have in place the processes. We weren't prepared. Our people worked as hard as they could, but you can't just start a program from flat-footed. And so we got in this situation, and it continued through 2016. Now we get to 2017, and we have a new board. We had 4 new board members put on the Board of Supervisors, which is really unprecedented. I mean, maybe you get 3 in a cleaning house, but because of a recall in our county, we have 4 new people sitting on the board, and the senior member of our board now had only been there for 2 years. So, once again, we were a little flat-footed. The board decided on January 31st at a study session to the majority of the board to direct staff to put forward a total ban on cannabis. And so we went from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum in the course of a few months. So we've been trying to manage this. The Board of Supervisors put together an ad hoc committee, which I was a part of, and Supervisor Mills was a part of. We met. Dennis and I come at this from different perspectives. I think that we have to regulate cannabis, and Dennis believes we need to ban cannabis. But we came together and we talked about things that we both agreed upon at that time. 4 items in particular that we came together. One was that we should not have an ad hoc committee. Any policy that's made around cannabis needs to be done in a public manner with public input. Mm-hmm. A lot of the pushback we got from 2016 ordinance was that it was done in the dark. People didn't know it was happening, and this was presented. So we didn't want that to happen again. So the first item was to eliminate the ad hoc committee. I should add that the ad hoc committee came into existence when we thought that there was going to be a measure put on the ballot either for banning cannabis or allowing cannabis. Many of us, while that initiative B was not well written, we looked at it. I certainly looked at it as a referendum. Do people in this county want it, or people in this county don't want it? And as I told my constituents, if the majority of the people vote to ban, I will work to figure out how to ban. If the majority of the people vote to regulate, we'll figure out a way to regulate. But that got shot down, and so there was no real purpose for the ad hoc. Let's have this out in public. The second item was to put in place a cannabis coordinator. One of the things that I certainly observed over this last year was that it was a disjointed process. There was nobody really in charge. You have department heads who are very hardworking and trying to do the right thing, but there was nobody overseeing it and reporting out to the board on where the obstacles were and how the board could help. The third item was that we were going to make a statement saying that, if you're growing illegally in the county, don't. We're going to come and we're going to get you out of here. Don't move to the county this spring and set up an illegal farm. We have the resources and we have the commitment on the part of the Board of Supervisors to enforce our land use laws. And then the fourth item was for this coordinator position to conduct monthly study sessions with the board, talking about what are we going to do? If we're going to ban, what are the moving parts to that? If we're going to regulate, what are the moving parts to that? And really put that together. And the part that I think Dennis and I at the time agreed upon was that, whether you ban or whether you regulate, you need to have in place a process for enforcement of that rule, because a ban without enforcement means nothing.
Jack, while this is going on, didn't you know that the planning department was working on an ordinance? It was at the direct of the Board of Supervisors, and when you presented that on Tuesday, didn't you know that on Friday? Because, county staff has to talk. You didn't know that this was going to come out on Friday?
We knew that the ban ordinance was going to come out shortly.
And did you know it was going to be a total ban? It was going to be.
We did. The Board of Supervisors, the majority of the Board of Supervisors, directed staff to create a ban that was to the total extent of the California law under Proposition 64. Mm-hmm. We have to remember that growing cannabis is no longer a felony act. It is a land use issue. So we knew that this was coming. We knew that I didn't know it was going to come out on Friday. But as I said, whether you want regulation or a ban, you're going to have in place a process of enforcement. And so the nice part about what we were proposing originally was that this sort of fell in the middle. Either way you wanted it, you needed to have a process in place. You need to have accountability on how we're spending our dollars, accountability on how many illegal growers we're dealing with, accountability on how quickly we can move through applications, for example.
One of the news stories I read on this, and I don't know if it was a direct quote of yours or if it was the writer, said that, you felt the rug had been pulled out from under you when you showed up at the meeting, and Supervisor Mills voted against her, said he wasn't in favor of any of the ad hoc suggestions.
Yes, that was a surprise to me. I assumed that we had an agreement, but obviously I was wrong.
So, we agree to disagree. So what happens now, Jack? Do you just that's gone, and so now we're going to spend some time looking at this new draft ordinance, and the board will, add, delete, and then that's going to be the law of Calaveras County?
I believe so. I mean, I think that what happens now is we have to continue to try to enforce our ordinances. We won't do it with the cannabis controller. What we'll do it with is the process that we currently have in place. I believe our department heads are working very hard on this. Certainly our sheriff is putting together plans, our code enforcement, our planning department are all putting in place plans, and I believe that they will work together in a coordinated manner to knock these out.
So where would the responsibility lie? Would the land use department, the planning department, would they be the ones who would send someone out in a helicopter or a car driving around? I mean, like the weed abatement people. I mean, how would you go? And I don't mean marijuana weed. I mean, the weeds and the old junk cars.
Well, it doesn't take much looking to find it.
Yeah,
it's rather ubiquitous across the county, but. Really, this will come under more or less a joint task force that's primarily run by code enforcement. This is a land use issue. If you are growing illegally, you are violating a code. The sheriff will be there to provide law enforcement support. Environmental health will be there to clean things up. And so what we'll do is, what we did was we put in place a new ordinance, a abatement ordinance, because what we found in the last year was that there was a lot of growers that were willing to game the system. If you got an abatement letter, you could appeal and then appeal again, just like any homeowner could. Well, what we found was that was gaming the system, would allow people to move forward and 30, 90-day extensions. They could harvest, They could plant again if they were indoors and get another crop off. And what we found was that that was not working. So this new ordinance that we've got in place will allow about 17 days from issuing a violation to abating a site.
Jack, I guess what most people are worried about is the criminal element.
Very much so.
The criminal element that this can bring, has brought, will bring, and if we can get rid of it. But you say that this has been going on, and we know it's been going on in Calaveras County for a long time. Everybody, has it been that? I mean, is it just after the Butte fire with this land rush, the second gold rush in Calaveras County that kind of brought that element, the cartels, the bad guys? Right.
Well, I think that, certainly the cartels have been operating up there for a long time. I mean, many of us have had illegal grows on our property. I know our family has. I have been called by cartels in the middle of the night. It's a scary situation.
Yeah.
And we've got, we have to remember that we have people who have moved to this county who have tried to follow our rules and registered. We also have a great deal more people who have moved to, in essence, hide in the herd. There's so many. I would estimate there's between 1,500 and 1,800 grows. You got to figure 700 of them tried to register. As we go through The process of screening these, we're probably going to end up with about 350, 400 legal, legitimate grows. Well, that still leaves 1,000, I'll call them bad guys. And we need to get rid of those. If you're breaking our rules, you should not be in our county.
So I'm hearing you, but I don't think I'm understanding you. So will the grows that are permitted and grows that are legal right now be allowed to go, to move on? Or if this draft ordinance from Friday is approved and made law, those will have to be ripped up and...
That's correct. The new ordinance that was put forward on Friday.
So they'll go away.
Well, nothing goes away unless you make it go away.
Okay.
I think we could hide our head in the sand and say, just because we say no, you'll leave. Well, that's not the reality. The reality is people leave when they're forced to leave. Yeah. Bad guys stop criminal behavior when they have no choice. Mm-hmm. We also know that in many cases this isn't a criminal act. So, the sheriff can't go in and say, you're growing marijuana, we're going to put you in handcuffs and throw you in the pen. We have to go in and say, you're breaking the law, and we're going to abate your product. Now, I believed, and the reason why I wanted to move forward quickly on this coordinator position was because the only way to really get the bad guys out is to hit them in the pocketbook. Mm-hmm. And it's very expensive if you've just planted a crop and you've just sunk several $100,000 into this to suddenly have the county show up with a chipping machine and chip your plants. That's a deterrent.
Yeah, that would be.
A traffic ticket, a misdemeanor is not a deterrent when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars of product.
Right.
Losing that product is.
We're talking with Calaveras County Supervisor Jack Garamendi. Jack, we've got a break for the top of the hour news. Can you hang around and
Sure.
we'll just we'll visit maybe 5 more minutes. We'll talk about maybe where we're going to go from here with all of this and so forth.
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. You're listening to 1340 96.5 KVGC. Again, we're talking with Calaveras County Supervisor Jack Garamendi. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll be back with a look at local news and more. 1340 96.5 KVGC. We've been chatting with Supervisor Jack Garamendi this morning, talking about the ad hoc committee recommendation that was kind of shot down on Tuesday. Did they even allow you to give the recommendations, Jack,
No.
or did it just...
We gave the recommendations the week before.
Oh, okay.
And so we actually called a special meeting to take them on.
Okay, and then that's when it was, no. No, we don't want to hear it. And then on Friday, the county planning department released a 20-page draft ordinance, which you can go on our website and follow the link, or just go to the Calaveras County webpage and follow the link and read it in its entirety. Basically, banning all cannabis grows except for those allowed by state law.
That's correct.
And so we were talking about where this leads us now. So I guess where do we move from here, Jack?
Well,
how are you going to, I guess, enforce this?
That is a question. The ordinance that was put forward is very clear and straightforward, and it is a total ban on everything. It excludes dispensaries since that falls under a different category, and it complies with the state law, allowing people to grow up to 6 plants in an enclosed, secure space. But the ban would go into effect. We have to complete an EIR. The EIR goes out to 45-day public review. Then the ban goes to the Planning Commission, and then eventually to the Board of Supervisors. So the Board of Supervisors can expect to see this probably late June, early July. Mm-hmm. It would go they would approve it, assuming they continue to have a majority of members that want to do that. And then 30 days after that, it'll go into effect, and the growers have 90 days after that to comply. So it's not going to get in front of this.
So when it sounds like they'll make it this current grow season right now, it sounds like they will make it through this grow season, but by next it will fully be in effect and
that's correct. That's correct. Now those are the registered legal growers,
yes,
people who will make it through. It is our hope and our intent to take out the illegal growers or take out their crops during this time, before next harvest.
Was some of the money that the legal growers paid in permits, would that have been used to eradicate illegal grows?
Yes, we would have used that. We've got about 1.9.
Was that earmarked yet? Had anybody said, okay, we'll give Sheriff DeBasilio, you can have this much money, we're going to... Was that already done?
We have not split up the money like that. We've got about $1.9 million still in that account for processing and enforcement. We've got roughly 25 people in the county that are paid through those funds. Those are deputies, those are code enforcement, those are planning staff, environmental health staff. So, those people are all committed. The question is going to be, once we go into a ban, second we pass a ban, any remaining funds in that account will have to be returned to the growers. We also got Proposition C, which tax bills, which is a canopy tax on growers, which will go out in May. So, the county will be sitting on several $1 million of monies. Large chunk of those would be general fund monies. At the same time, we're going through a budget. So we have to start asking ourselves, how are we going to pay for enforcement of this? How are we going to pay for the cops? How are we going to pay for the people who are going to enforce a ban? Because as I said before, if you don't have money for enforcement, a ban doesn't mean anything, except that, everybody becomes an outlaw.
Yeah. So you feel that the Board of Supervisors will pass this. This will move through.
I do.
Okay. Can it be repealed by a vote of the people?
Yes, it can be. In fact, if the people decided to conduct a referendum, it would hold our ordinance until either the county changes it or a vote of the people.
A lot of this ordinance was Measure B. Was a lot of that in this too? I mean, if Measure B had have gone to the voters and had passed, would it have been pretty much what this draft ordinance is? No.
Actually, Measure B was a poorly written law that was, or proposition that was put forward. It probably, the general consensus was it wasn't going to make it through the court system, but what it would have done is it would have given the Board of Supervisors a clear direction on whether the people of Calaveras wanted to have cultivation or didn't want to have cultivation. As I've told my constituents, a 50% plus one vote say no, and we will find a way to unwind this. I think the key that we need to think about is, how do we responsibly unwind something like this? How do we do it in such a way that preserves the safety of our community without just turning our back and acting as if it's not happening? Because it is happening in my district, and people are afraid. And for good reason. There are definitely good guys and there are bad guys. But safety needs to be our primary concern. So how are we going to fund that? And I don't have the answer to that.
And how can you separate the bad guys from the good guys?
Well, good guys who go through the process and have registered have actually gone through a lot of steps. They've agreed to submit to background checks, criminal background checks. They've agreed to pay funds to the Water Conservation Board to make sure that their water is good. They're open to inspection from ag and environmental health for chemical processing, what they're putting on it. They have to say where they're selling it. And they have to file the correct paperwork with the state. So these are people who have self-selected that wanted to be within the law.
Jack, was this all recreational marijuana that's growing in Calaveras County, or is it medical? Is there a...
Well, I think prior to Proposition 64, we would have said it was all medical.
Okay.
But, honestly, I don't know where all the cannabis goes afterwards.
Yeah.
It goes to dispensaries throughout the state.
I would also assume that there's probably a large section of the business community that has profited from these marijuana farms.
Absolutely. I mean, University of Pacific did a study and it said that this is about $250 million industry in Calaveras County. Calaveras County doesn't have a lot of industry going on. I think we're working hard to build greater infrastructure around industry, but this was a big part. So, you have to think this is in terms of, land values, in terms of people who sell soil, irrigation, grocery stores, gas stations. All of them have benefited.
I think that survey said that marijuana would eventually outstrip both cattle and grapes in
I
Calaveras
think cattle's
County.
about $9 million a year, so it outstrips it by quite a bit.
And you would know.
We would know.
You would know. So, all right, Jack. Thanks for stopping by this morning,
Jim.
And talking with us like this. And we invite anyone else. Is there anyone on? I guess we've kind of covered both sides of this, but if someone else would like to come, maybe Supervisor Mills would like to come. But I think pretty much Tuesday's meeting or Tuesday's decision is kind of moot at this point with this document now looking us in the face?
Well, I think it's the document that we're looking at is very clear, the ban ordinance that's being put forward. But I think the broader question is, how are we going to enforce this? How are we going to enforce a ban, or how do we enforce regulation? I think that's where we need to focus. Because
there'll be no more money coming in, and the money that's sitting there has to go back.
That's correct, including any tax measure money that we collect. So, we're not exactly flush in Calaveras County government, and we need to provide services and security to our people. So how are we going to do that? And that's a question we're going to have to really dive into in June when the board comes together, because we have to make choices. We have to make choices. We have no new revenue, so we're dealing with a zero-sum or even a minus game based upon the budget from last year. So how are we going to do that is going to be the question. Are we going to cut libraries to enforce cannabis policy? Are we going to cut public services, Meals on Wheels, to enforce cannabis ban? These are real questions that we need to talk about in our community, and how it's going to impact our businesses, sales tax. Whether even if you're an illegal grower and you're buying soil, you're paying sales tax, and a chunk of that comes back to the county. So, we've got a really tough situation, and we need to be wise, and we need to be thoughtful about how we move forward, because the easy answers oftentimes aren't the good ones. Life is much more complex, and we're in a complex situation. 60 Minutes had the governor of the state of Colorado on, and he said at the end of his interview, this is the most complex issue in public policy. And, we're trying to deal with it in Little Calaveras County. Yeah. So, we happen to be the pointy end of the spear. And I talked to other counties, including some of the larger growing counties up in Northern California. I say, well, what are you guys doing? And they say, well, we're watching you.
There we go.
So, it's been a long time since Calaveras has been in the lead, and here we are.
No one talks about it, but I believe Butte County is a large growing county. And, of course, Mendocino, Humboldt are also big growing counties.
And Butte County took on their enforcement. They said, well, the way we're going to deal with this is through abatement. We're going to go and we're going to knock out these growers. We're going to put liens on their properties and fines on the growers, and that's how we'll pay for it. Well, they've been collecting about 5%. So, the money's not, we have to be more creative than just saying, because that'll go away, or we'll put a lien on the property, because a lot of these people will say fine and walk, and then we're stuck with environmental cleanup.
Well, Supervisor Garamendi, can you stop by some time and visit with us, maybe when we're just kind of visiting?
Hey, you got great coffee in the shop. I'm always happy to stop by for a good cup of coffee. Thank you, Jim.
Jack, thanks for coming in. All right, we'll be right back with a look at today's news in just a moment.